Hello everyone, Silent Gamer here. With the buffs to Winston's Barrier in Season 4 of competitive Overwatch, dive composition has really taken over as the way to play competitive Overwatch at high level. Basically, every high-tier team has been experimenting or being very successful with dive composition, and has gotten to the point where dive composition is considered to be pretty clearly better than some of the more traditional Reinhardt Deathball compositions that really base their entire team composition off of that stationary Reinhardt shield. However, there's been a lot of frustration with trying to figure out how to deal with this. If you're playing with a good team against a good team, it's very easy for the enemy Tracer, the enemy Genji, to do a lot of work without feeling like you have a lot of response to it. So in this video, I want to show you a response to dive composition that's recently been very effective and consistent among the Apex teams that are playing at a very high level against the dive compositions. Starting out, this is a game between LW Blue and MVP Space, and right off the bat, you can see that there's quite some interesting compositional decisions going on with LW Blue because they are running this triple support to try and counter the dive composition that we're going to see coming out from MVP Space. In order to run this triple support strategy, they have only a single DPS of Sebille Beyond Tracer, and Pine, who's usually their DPS player, is going to flex onto the Ana as the third support. So I'm just going to play through this first fight to kind of just see how the fight breaks down, and then rewind and look at exactly why the strategy is very effective, and I would say a better response to dive composition than some of the more traditional things that you would expect, like running Reinhardt in 76 or running a McCree and a Roadhog to try and kill these flankers. So MVP Space, as you can see, is running just a pretty standard dive composition. I don't really want to go in depth on what they're doing, but they're just going to slowly approach in here, find where LW Blue is defending, and then go for a dive. We're going to see the Genji game here. The Genji dashes in, almost kills this Lucio. The Lucio's at 1 health, but barely isn't able to finish off the kill, ends up having to back up, and meanwhile, Sebille kills the Zenyatta, but all the tanks go down for MVP Space, and it ends up being a pretty clean and effortless looking hold almost from LW Blue, even though they're playing against a very difficult composition to hold against. So at this point, let's rewind and see exactly why this composition is so powerful when you're facing up against dive. The first reason that this composition is so good against dive is that it forces enemy team to use their cooldowns much earlier than they'd like to. When you're looking at dive composition, there's a lot of very key abilities that are on long cooldowns that the enemy team needs in order to be effective when they're initiating. The biggest one that you can see first here is this Lucio Amp It Up speed boost. The Amp It Up gives the enemy team a bunch of dive power, and if they can have that dive power after the fight has already begun, it's very easy for them to continue steamrolling a fight after they take one kill, because they can quickly chase down and kill any stragglers. So it's a very powerful cooldown to have if they don't use it when the fight starts. Another important one is this D.Va right here. The defense matrix only lasts for 4 seconds if the D.Va holds right click constantly and takes a 10-second cooldown to actually recharge. In addition to that, D.Va's fly ability is on a 5-second cooldown. So once D.Va uses these cooldowns, she's essentially kind of useless, just sitting there shooting away with shotguns that aren't really as damaging as a lot of the other things you're worried about on the enemy team. The same story is true with this Genji. His Swift Strike is on a long cooldown. This Winston, once he uses his bubble, it's very hard for him to actually initiate. And if Tracer is blinking in and using 3 blinks, it can be very tough for her to survive without any blinks to be dodging abilities from the enemy team. So what LW Blue here does is they use the extra healing power that they have from having this Ana to force cooldowns out in this fight earlier from MVP Space. Because they have this healing power, their Winston and their D.Va, you can kind of see them in the back here, are able to stand really aggressively on the point. And even though they're pretty much out in front of the entire enemy team here, you can see D.Va has pretty reasonable health still. She's missing maybe 150, and this Winston is at full health still, despite him standing out in the open in front of the entire enemy team without having used his bubble. So because they're running this extra healer instead of a DPS, it gives them a lot of freedom to be more aggressive in positioning their tanks to actually force, if this Tracer wants to come in, she's actually going to have to use multiple blinks to actually get in behind these supports instead of only having to use maybe one and then having multiple blinks to dodge in and out of the fight after the actual initiation. Another thing that this composition really excels at is using the offensive power as Ana because she isn't able to be free. If you look at the enemy team or the LW Blues team composition, you can see that if the Zenyatta is not here, the only thing that can really protect this Ana is the Lucio heals and the Ana grenade. Normally, if you're in this situation, you have to save your Ana grenade because if you get dove on, that's the only thing that's going to be able to save you from the Winston shooting you, the Tracer shooting you, the Genji shooting you. There's just a ton of damage coming in a very short time, and you need that extra healing, that extra heal amp from the Lucio to be able to live through that. However, because LW Blue is running this Zenyatta as a support, it gives Pine on Ana the ability to be extremely aggressive with his Ana nade, and you're going to see that basically through all of these fights. So as I resume, I'm going to take a look at how Pine completely ignores healing his teammates, and instead is going to be going for damage. Essentially, he's replacing one of the DPS for LW Blue and enabling them to be way more aggressive. So once again here, I'm just pointing out this Lucio is at very low health, and normally here, if you weren't running this Zenyatta, right here in the back that can just throw a Harmony Orb onto your Lucio, the Ana here must nade the ground right here to keep her Lucio alive. Because if this Lucio goes down, then the Ana has no healing at all left, and it's super easy to take out the Ana in that situation. However, instead of going for that, what Ana's actually going to do is run through this Winston bubble and just go ahead and nade the entire enemy team, and that actually ends up getting two people, the Genji and the D.Va anti-healed, which immediately removes them from the fight. You're going to see here, the Genji instantly backs up and essentially can't do anything else until the anti-heal ends up wearing off. That's the power of this strategy. Because you're replacing a, let's say, Soldier 76, maybe a McCree, maybe a Roadhog with this Ana instead, you're able to hit these nades that force enemies to disengage even if you're not killing them. And that's very consistent, which is why it's so good. If you're running a Soldier 76 in this situation, or a McCree or a Roadhog, sure, they can kill this Genji every now and then, right? If the McCree hits a flashbang and a nice headshot, if the Soldier hits a nice Helix rocket in the Genji midair, all of these alternatives give you the ability to kill this Genji, but it's very difficult to do. So if you contrast the difficulty with hitting that midair Helix rocket or a headshot on double jumping Genji, it's really easy to see that for Ana, it's quite simple to just walk forward and hit that grenade on the ground to nade the enemy team. And it makes it much easier to actually defend these kind of dive composition pushes because of the power of the offensive Ana nade. The other advantage that this triple support composition has is that it takes a lot of pressure off of Saebyeolbe, who's playing the Tracer, as you can see right here. Now, normally, if you're playing against this dive composition as defense, you have to be very careful about not letting your supports or your tanks to go down. And so your DPS has to be constantly worrying about, oh, I gotta shoot this Tracer because she's coming in. Oh, I gotta shoot the Genji and get him to run away. Oh, I gotta shoot the Winston. But because of this triple support strategy, Saebyeolbe, he is really hard to see, but he's right here in the back in this carrot, is going to not have to worry about his team at all. And what he's actually going to do is, without any support from his team, he's going to flank around and come and backstab the supports from MVP space. Normally, as a Tracer, this would be a pretty risky move. Like, you could do it, but it would not be very easy to win a game like that, because you're essentially saying, I'm going to trade our support for your support. And because of how respawns work, the offensive support is going to get back before your team gets back. However, because of this extra sustain, Saebyeolbe is actually able to go for this flank, and so if you just watch Undyne, the Zenyatta's health from MVP space, in the top right corner, you can see that he just ends up getting 2-clipped by Saebyeolbe in the back, and we can see Saebyeolbe's camera right here. He forces the Tracer to come back, and essentially wins this team fight because he doesn't have to be worrying about his supports dying. He has the freedom to know, my supports are fine, I can actually go for some big plays, and that freedom allows this composition to be very powerful if you have a good Tracer player, and that's exactly what Saebyeolbe is. So now that LW Blue has pretty convincingly won the first fight, let's move on to the second fight that happens here. Once again, LW Blue has their tanks in very aggressive positioning. This D.Va actually is going to walk up. As you can see here, she's very close to the edge of this point, far away from the rest of her team. That would be normal positioning that you'd expect from a tank without this Ana on the lineup. So these tanks are enabled to have very forward positioning again, and because of this forward positioning, As one fact goes in here on this Tracer, he has to be very scared. You can't really see it very well. There's a D.Va that's off screen here on the right, and the Winston's pressuring her already before the Tracer is really initiated. Now, if Tracer wants to get these supports, she only has 2 blinks left, and she would have to probably use both of these blinks to try and get behind the enemy team supports right here, which would put her in a very vulnerable position. The Zenyatta can easily kill a Tracer. The Lucio can easily kill a Tracer that has no blinks left. So instead of actually being able to go in, One Fact has to play pretty passively here. He tries to go out and ends up actually getting picked off by an insane play from the Lucio. Because of that, Sebulbe on Tracer is able to go in really quickly, and LW Blue completely reverses the strategy they're playing, and knowing that the enemy Tracer's down, they essentially start playing the dive composition and end up pushing really hard into these kills, and end up convincingly taking the second fight as well. And once again, that's because of the aggressive tank position that we're seeing from LW Blue that's enabled by the Ana healing that they have. Having held the first 2 pushes here, LW Blue is in an extremely strong position because they managed to get up a lot of ultimates in this time. You can see Gambler on Lucio has his sound barrier, Luna on Zenyatta has this transcendence, and Ana on Pine has this nano boost. All these support ultimates are extremely impactful, and I think that's really the biggest strength of the strategy, is if we look at the macro game. So normally, if you're not running this triple support composition, you're going to have these support ultimates a little bit slower. As we can see, if we look at MVP Space's team, they have Closer, who's on Lucio, only 67% to his sound barrier, and Undyne is 64% to his transcendence on Lucio. Because Meko and Janus on tanks are able to play so aggressively, and they're sticking really far up on the point here, they're able to feed a lot more ultimate to their supports, which gets them the support ultimates that much quicker. And the support ultimates are really the key to stopping this dive composition. What Dive wants to do here is they want to eliminate a support quickly in the first fight, which is going to mean that maybe the Lucio, maybe the Zenyatta isn't going to have as much ultimate as the rest of their team. And that's going to slow them down to the point where maybe the Genji sword actually comes out before these critical ultimates are ready. Doing this, the dive composition can quickly steamroll a point and take it in under a minute. And that's when it really gets worrying, is if you think about the second point of Hollywood, the dive composition can easily push up, take control of the roofs, be able to get free damage essentially on the rest of the team, build more ultimates, and really stagger the enemy team, making it very difficult to effectively put up a defense at any point on the second point. Also, because they're having that steamrolling where maybe the Genji is sitting up there spamming shurikens from the roof, while you really can't hit him and do anything about it, that means that the dive composition is able to build their ults much more quickly than the enemy defense can actually manage. So it makes it very easy to steamroll through a point as dive composition. However, this triple support lineup has the advantage of very quickly getting these anti-steamroll ults. You have the Transcendence that's able to stop this Genji blade or just stop a push in general. You have the Sound Barrier that's able to quickly shut things down. And because of this, the composition being run by LW Blue of triple support is a very consistent answer to the dive composition because it just has those high value ults very quickly, and that enables it to stabilize and hold even if it doesn't do as well as you would like on the first point. Another team that's running this triple support defense strategy is Lunatic High. And so here they run pretty much a carbon copy of the strategy that we just saw from LW Blue on the same map, Hollywood Point 1 defense. Mighty AOD is going to be their opponents for this one, and they run a pretty standard dive composition, pretty much the exact same thing that we saw from MVP Space. So it's interesting to see how this also works for Lunatic High, even though they alter a couple things and have some pretty important differences in how they actually play the strategy. So here comes the dive composition. They're walking in slowly, but instead of waiting for them to go in, here goes Miro. He jumps right in to the entire enemy team as Winston and is relying on this D.Va who matrixes him and stops him from taking any damage to be able to back up. So that's a very big difference from how LW Blue ran the strategy, and the reason for this is that Lunatic High has a lot more strength in their tank and support players rather than in their DPS players. If you go ahead and take a look at the rosters here on either team, we can see that Who Are You is actually the person that's going to be playing Tracer for Lunatic High here. And that's interesting because Who Are You is actually pretty much a Genji player exclusively. I'm pretty sure this is one of the first times that he played hero other than Genji for Lunatic High in Apex at all. So they're not really confident and putting a lot of faith in Who Are You's Tracer. Instead, what they're doing is they're trying to give space to their tanks and supports. They're thinking that Miro is one of the best Winston players in the game. The Ryu Jaehong on Zenyatta is going to be able to do a lot of work. And so they're giving Miro and Ryu Jaehong a lot more space by actually playing this aggressive strategy. By rewinding a little bit, we can see that because Miro goes in with this initiation really quickly, he's going to jump in. He's not using his bubble yet. He actually lets the enemy team use a ton of cooldowns before he uses anything. You can see right here that the Winston bubble comes down. The Genji Swift Strike is going right through him on this arrow here. And as we resume, there's a bunch more cooldowns that end up being used. The D.Va flies in, uses a bunch of Matrix. The Tracer is using a bunch of Blinks to try and chase him. And so at this point, all the supports are in the backline with not really anything to actually jump on top of them. They don't have this amp it up speed boost. They don't have D.Va able to fly in. Tracer only has one blink left. Winston already used his bubble, so if he jumps in, he's very vulnerable. Genji already used his Swift Strike. So by playing this aggressively with Miro, who's already basically topped off to full health because of his Ana, they're able to make it so that it's very difficult for Mighty AOD to dive these supports by baiting out these cooldowns so early. And so as the fight continues, Tracer has to recall, and even though Mighty AOD tries to continue their push, without all of those crucial cooldowns that they just burned trying to chase down Miro, it's actually a pretty easy hold. You see the Tracer there with no blinks left is just easily taken out by the supports and tanks without really much DPS help from Who Are You. So that's once again showcasing the power of this strategy, that they have to either use all of their cooldowns to jump on your supports, and then your supports are very difficult to kill, or the enemy team running dive composition has to use all their cooldowns early to try and get your tanks off of the point, and it's very hard to kill those tanks because the Ana healing is there that would normally not be there if you were running just a standard dive composition, perhaps yourself. Not only does this aggressive positioning from Miro bait out a lot of cooldowns from Mighty AOD, but it also gives the supports on Lunatic High a lot more room to actually have an impact in the fight. The way that LW Blue ran the strategy was running all their supports positioned behind this office building in the back around this corner, which makes them very difficult to dive, but removes a lot of their impact from the fight. If you have a Zenyatta sitting back here, I mean, he can kind of see people that are diving him onto the point here, but he can't really have any impact on anything out here on the point or any people that are sitting in the back. Because Miro is playing so aggressively, though, Lunatic High is able to have their supports positioned much more aggressively, kind of in this little thing back here and behind these boxes. And that means that their supports at any time can peek around one of these boxes here, have a very nice firing line that's basically the entirety of the map that's going to be relevant, where they'll be able to see all the DPS, all the tanks, all the supports from the enemy team. So the only reason they're able to do this, though, is because Miro is pushing this far forward and making it so that it's very difficult to dive all the way back here. As you can see, because this Winston is here, this Tracer would have to use all of her blinks just to get back to these supports. Whereas if Lunatic High played more like LW Blue did and have their Winston back here, their D.Va back here, then it's much easier for this Tracer to get in on top of these supports if they're positioned over here. So by playing this aggressively, Lunatic High allows Ryu Jaehong on Zenyatta and Guido on Ana to have a much better time actually doing damage, and also takes a lot of pressure off of Who Are You, who essentially is not going to be the main DPS for Lunatic High, even though he is playing the Tracer. In the second fight, Lunatic High basically does the exact same thing right here. Miro's just trying to bait out as many cooldowns from Mighty AOD as he can, so that his supports are very safe after the fact. Here it gets a little bit scary because he gets right-clicked down to half health almost instantly, and you can see he has to back up quite quickly. But in order to do that, there were a lot of important cooldowns that Mighty AOD ends up using. Their Tracer uses a bunch of blinks that are essentially useless because now she's flanking but has no way to actually initiate. The Genji dashes through him right there in the back. The D.Va flies in to chase after him. And in the back you see barely that this Winston bubble ends up going up. So once again, Mighty AOD heavily overcommitted to this defense by using all of their critical cooldowns. And now, even though Miro was super low because he got animated, he's at full health almost immediately once again, and the supports in the back are very safe. So by playing this aggressively with Winston on this map, Lunatic Hai is able to take a ton of pressure off of their supports and abuse the sustain that they have to pretty easily end up taking this fight in the end. We're going to see D.Va goes down, Genji has no dash, he ends up Dragon Blading and going in, but Zenyatta already has the Transcendence, and really just nothing dies from Lunatic Hai this entire fight. Miro ends up getting low and pops the Primal Rage, but that's about the closest that Mighty AOD got to getting a single kill at all in this entire fight. The last big advantage of the triple support composition is that it's very easy to transition off of it if you run it on first point defense. A lot of times teams will run specific first point strategies that are designed around a mechanic that if they don't work, it really puts them behind in the second point. For instance, Torbjorn can be very effective at shutting down dive, but if you do end up losing, the Torbjorn has to switch and then one of your other supports will have very little ultimate charge because of that loss. However, as we're going to watch this game, Lunatic Hai gets absolutely destroyed by Rogue on the first point. You can really tell that Rogue did their homework and knew that this composition could come out. Because they scouted out, and as soon as the team compositions are revealed in a couple seconds, all of them go back and switch off to a different composition to specifically counter this triple support. So Rogue is coming in and has an insanely good push and quickly takes this. There's a bunch of unfortunate things that happen to Lunatic Hai that start right off the bat when Zenyatta randomly kills the Tracer, and so their only DPS is gone. Miro jumps in as Winston, he gets booped back by the D.Va, he gets booped back by the Lucio, and just instantly goes down without really doing much. And so, without really doing anything, Rogue is already 2 people up. And even though they have a pretty big lead at this point, Rogue just doesn't have the DPS to finish off a lot of these targets. And so right now, if you look at Ryu Jae-hong's ult charge, if you look at Toby's ult charge, they're building a ton of ult off of all this healing that they're getting, even though they're completely losing this fight. And although it's pretty much inevitable at this point that Lunatic Hai is going to take this point, it's not as one-sided as it often can be. The scary thing going against a dive composition is that now, a lot of times, everyone on the enemy team can have ults, and then you have no ults. But if we look at what's going on here, Ryu Jae-hong basically has his Transcendence already. He's at 90%. And so they're not very far behind, even though they ran this strategy and did not execute it very well. There aren't really any other first point strategies or things that you can run trying to counter the dive composition that are going to be so flexible to be able to go up against a double hit scam lineup like Lunatic or like Rogue is running right now and be able to effectively work or to not have that ult disadvantage. And so this strategy is very effective, not only because it's not terribly hard to execute and it's a lot more consistent than trying to hook a Genji double jumping midair with your Roadhog, but also because it isn't very all in and it's very easy to transition even if you get absolutely demolished on the first point. For anyone struggling to find a way to beat dive compositions, triple support is definitely something worth trying out. Not only is it relatively easy to execute compared to the alternatives of trying to out-aim the dive composition, but it's also very easy to coordinate because your supports are so good at keeping each other alive, and they don't need as much peel from the rest of your team. Additionally, it's a very flexible strategy that is easy to transition off of if it doesn't work, and it's very effective even at the highest levels of play. Upon seeing this strategy, Rogue immediately switched off of their trademark triple DPS dive composition without a second thought, and so far the only strategy that has actually beaten the triple support is to just switch off dive entirely and try and beat the triple support composition by running some sort of counter comp specifically designed for it. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Leave any thoughts on how I could improve this format for future videos in the comments section. Good luck and have fun out there.